I truly am not kidding when I say that this book saved the romantasy genre for me. Hello beautiful people, my name is Vendi and today I'm going to be bringing you a review of Swordcrossed by Freya Marks. Before I even get started, I want to let you know that the book is out today, so I'll have links in the description box below of where you can purchase yourself a copy if this review strikes your fancy. And with that out of the way, I want to just get into the review because I truly am just so elated at what this book has done for me and the subgenre of romantasy for me in particular. To explain a little bit first about what I mean by romantasy, because I've seen a lot of different definitions kind of going around and a lot of them overlap with what I consider to be romantic fantasy or fantasy romance. When I speak of romantasy, what I'm talking about in particular are books where the sort of central internal conflict of the story hinges on the romance between two or more characters, whereas the central external conflict is based a little bit more on the fantasy world that is happening around them. The foundation upon which these two characters were raised in and grew up in, and that sort of shaped their personalities and the ways that they interact with one another and the world. Romantic fantasy, on the other hand, are very much fantasy forward stories wherein there are subplots of romance, but those subplots could be taken out and the plot would keep happening. And on the other hand, we have fantasy romance where the central everything is the romance story and the fantasy world around them is truly just trappings. For a romantasy to be a true romantasy for me, I think that the fantasy worlds need to at least a little bit take center stage and make a lot of sense, which is where many of them have fallen flat for me. Not so with Swordcrossed, and I'm absolutely thrilled about it. I am getting a little bit ahead of myself, so let me tell you what the book is kind of about first before I start gushing about all the things I like about it. Swordcrossed follows Maddie, the heir of Jay House, which is the guild house that is most prominently known for the creation of wool in their city of Glassport. Glassport and the other 9 free states, the world where the story of Swordcrossed takes place, puts a lot to store by craft. The making of things is really important, and that is in fact how people gain any sort of prestige and money. There aren't necessarily nobles so much as there are craftsman houses, and they have the political and social capital that basically makes the rest of the city run. Unbeknownst to just about every other family though, Maddie's house, the Jay house, is kind of failing. They've made a couple of bad investments and a bunch of bad luck has befallen them lately, and Maddie hopes to reverse these fortunes by making an advantageous marriage. However, further misfortune befalls when Maddie realizes that his betrothed has a rather persistent former lover who will be challenging at the wedding, and they can't take any sort of scandal. So Maddie has to go out with money he barely has to find himself the best man to duel in his stead at his wedding and make sure that the wedding goes off with as few hitches as possible, that the gods appear to be smiling down on the union, and basically reverse the poor luck of his house. However, while he's out drinking with some of his groomsmen to keep up appearances and make it seem as though his house is still thriving, Maddie ends up losing a little more money than he can spare when he accidentally destroys the watch carried by a harried clerk of another house who demands reparations for the broken watch. But when Maddie goes with a much lighter person he initially intended to the Guild House of Swords to hire himself the best man that he can now afford, who does he happen to find except that clerk? Only the clerk is not a clerk. As it turns out, Maddie was conned the night before by a young man named Luca Pierre, who is new to Glassport and, as it turns out, is a pretty deft sword hand himself. To keep himself out of prison and to keep Maddie's name basically safe, Luca offers his sword hand to Maddie to be his best man. And despite the very rough beginnings of their meeting, the two form a very close bond and the story goes from there. I had so much fun with Swordcrossed. As I am primarily a character-based reader, of course no romantasy or any sort of story could be anything if I didn't root for the protagonists as much as humanly possible, and I absolutely did for both Maddie and for Luca. And perhaps most importantly, as it is a romance story, I really love the two of them together. I'm of the opinion that the opposites attract thing only really works for surface level things, and Maddie and Luca have that in spades. Maddie's very reserved and knows how to put a face on, and he is very self-sacrificing. He will do whatever it takes to keep his family from feeling the burdens of what he feels are his failures to his house. He is so concerned with making sure that everyone around him feels no wanting, feels no suffering, that he will take on every possible burden and won't even complain when his back starts cracking under them. And on the other hand, you have Luca, who is impulsive and selfish and so deeply charming and roguish, and who isn't afraid to cut corners and frankly would rather cut corners than do just about anything else. But what the two of them have in common, what sort of I think makes their bond more important, is that both of them secretly are deeply selfish. They're both deeply hungry and full of want and desire, and that those desires kind of overlap in many ways. Both of them have a ruthlessness at the heart of them that is willing to do just about anything to make sure that their goals are achieved. And once they start caring about one another, that ruthlessness is turned in service of the other as well. Luca is willing to use all of those unsavory things that he knows how to do to help Mari and his family's fortunes, and Mari is willing to use the persona that he's sort of grown into of the head of house, a very sort of domineering and dominant personality, to make things a little smoother for Luca, who is at a lower financial, social, and political kind of level of importance than he is. And while they are quite slow intellectually to trust one another, which makes total sense given that they meet by Luca conning Maddie out of a lot of money that Maddie desperately needs, from the start they seem to have a pretty instinctual knowledge of what the other actually needs and a desire to defend the other from any harm. It takes a little while for them to learn each other, which I appreciate, because I don't really love the whole insta-love. Just because we're attracted to one another means we sort of get one another instinctually from the moment we've met each other. But they learn and they ask questions and they apologize when they step in it. And it's really nice to see a relationship like that grow organically from sort of mistrust to mutual benefit to true affection to love by the end of it. The escalation makes perfect sense, and I really enjoy, because it is a queer story, obviously, that the tension of the story didn't come from the fact that this was two men falling in love, but from the fact that one of them was engaged to somebody else and the other is sort of lying about his identity to everyone he meets. And the central conflict between them is less miscommunication and more outright and intentional lying that the both of them need to sort of get past and figure out how to work through. I don't love the miscommunication trope, as is a pretty popular opinion here on the Bookternet, but I do love when the characters' intentional actions cause any sort of drama and rift between them in an emotional way. And like I said, these two are entirely organically built. I truly felt that the two of them were falling in love on page, and it was delightful to see. I found myself kicking my little feet in just giddy anticipation of the next degree of closeness that they would feel for one another. I felt myself actually being a little bit heartbroken when in their internal monologues they were like, oh, I can't actually keep this person, the first thing that I've like wanted for myself properly in a very long time. The emotions that they felt, I felt them too, and I think that that only happens when you create well-rounded characters whose actions make sense in a story and who interact with the other characters and the world in a way that feels honest and true. Speaking of the other characters, though obviously as a romantasy, it's going to be primarily about the relationship between the primary two characters, because of the external conflict, because of the thing that's happening around them in the world, we did have a varied and wonderful cast of supporting characters, all of whom I enjoyed tremendously as well. Romantasy authors, take note. You don't need a war to be your central external fantasy thing that is happening. In fact, it's better if you don't know how to actually write one to any capacity in a way that is sensical. What you can have instead is a tremendous amount of political intrigue, which obviously requires you to do more character work. And I'm thrilled to say that Freya Marks had knocked it out of the park in that respect as well. Maddie's family, the Jays, are so tight-knit, and though they have secrets from one another, mostly on Maddie's part, to try to keep them protected from the pressures he's under to keep their family name afloat, they're a deeply loving family, and once he begins to let them in, he has a tremendous amount of support for them, which is very much needed because neither Maddie or Luca can kind of catch a break given all the political machinations happening behind their backs and sort of pulling the wool over their eyes. Haha, get it? Wool, because J House does wool. Maddie's sister Maya in particular and his betrothed Sophia Cooper in particular are two allies that I feel that the boys need very much, because they sort of fill in the gaps that the boys don't fill in for one another in terms of needed skills for getting things done. Maya, Maddie's sister, is really good at, she calls it rose oiling, basically being charismatic and charming and making problems smaller than they actually are. And Sophia is an absolute force of nature. She is the darling of the ton. Everyone looks to her to like decide what's in fashion, and she herself has a really good head on her shoulders and does not want the attentions of the guy who is planning to challenge at her and Maddie's wedding. That in particular was really important to me because I think cheating is like a really ugly thing. So it was good to see that Sophia, like Maddie, also was not exactly enthused about their relationship relationship proceeding in any sort of true romantic way. It was just really important for me to be able to root for Luca and Maddie, especially as their relationship progressed into a more physical and emotional sense, that Sophia was not holding a candle to Maddie as well. I think Marxa did a really good job of indicating that no, these two were never going to be endgame, and neither of them wanted it to be endgame, which was great for me in terms of just like not feeling as conflicted about enjoying the romance happening at the center of the story. Anyway, what I was saying about the family that they've got, about the sort of allies that they have in this situation, the reason they need them so bad is because everywhere you turn, there are snakes around every corner. To avoid getting into too many spoilers, just let's suffice it to say that they are facing challenges of the political variety, of the corporate espionage variety, and just the plain mean guys variety. Things are not easy interpersonally for either Maddie or Luca with just about anyone except for the two of them and the time that they carve out with one another. And carve out time they do. I think Marxa did a really good job of building the physical tension between them by giving them excuses to just touch and be proximal to one another. And to tie those moments into the plot as well, into the goings on of the story, which again, I will not spoil because I really think you should read it, was just masterfully done. I think the build was organic and it was just so lovely to see from start to finish, from sword lessons to getting caught in a closet together while they're doing a little bit of spying of their own. I just think every step sort of just ratcheted up the tension a little bit more. So when they finally got together, it was a deeply satisfying thing. And that brings me to the part of the story that I think most Romantasy authors actually get wrong and that Marxa did so well that it skyrocketed this book to an easy 5 out of 5 stars for me. And that is the world building. More specifically, the way that the world tied into the characters and to the plot and vice versa. Glassport, the city-state that Maddie and Luca's whole shebang happens in, is a city deeply rooted in not only commerce and craft, but also the tradition of religion. Each guild house, each type of craft falls under the auspices of one of the several gods. The wool makers, like Maddie's family, the J House, pray to the god Huna, who is incredibly important, not just for the purposes of, oh, how is our wedding going to come about? Like, what god are we honoring here? But in terms of just the day-to-day expressions that people use, the swears that they use, and all that sort of like color, all those sort of trappings that the world gets to have around it. But the gods also dictate, for example, auspicious days when certain commerce can happen. And a lot of Maddie's stress comes around figuring out which gods have auspicious days when he is trying to bring together various other guilds, other houses, other god-ruled people to come together to make any sort of business dealing happen. The sort of central crux of the story overall, the fact that Maddie needs a best man in the first place, is because if his wedding happens and it is challenged and he loses the duel, the marriage will essentially be seen to be not in favor by his god. Basically, his god will be seen as rejecting Sophia from the marriage, and the misfortunes of Jay's house will not be able to be kept under wraps anymore. There's mention throughout the story that the religions used to be more important and more valuable, and that duels used to go to the death rather than, just to the victory, but that those things have changed, and what's really important about them, less so than the god themselves, is the way that people, the community, comes around and believes in these rituals and uses them as a sort of reason to care about one another or a reason to harm one another, as the case may be. It is the human element of religion that is seen as important. And that was really fascinating to me because Glassport, the city-state, is a very cosmopolitan place. It is a place of trade. It is a place where a lot of these houses and thus a lot of these gods have their fingers in the sort of goings on of everything that the people are doing. It allows Marxa to create both a very racially varied populace with a bunch of different sorts of people with different traditions and religions and everything, which I find to be very true to life and more accurate than the, oh, this one person is the king of an entire planet and everyone speaks this language and follows this one god sort of thing that you get in, let's say, less well done types of Romantasy. And the realism, and I do say realism because while the gods are often named and invoked, they don't actually make a full appearance in the story. It would be a very different story if it involved the actual acts of gods. What I was saying is it's a very grounded story because in addition to the effects of religion, we also have the effects of commerce and trade. We have Maddie's father who has a seat on the guild hall and is fighting for the small people who aren't people with titled houses, but are in fact the ones that let the houses build their fortunes on their backs, the same way that we sort of exist. There is the working class and then there is the owning class. In this case, the owning class is also somewhat of a working class, but not quite. They're not the ones, you know, laying brick. There's a saying that's repeated several times in the book that I am gonna absolutely butcher now, but the idea is the gods reward people who walk halfway across the bridge and the gods will see them through onto the other side. But then the rebuttal to that is, but who built the bridge? And that would be the people who are working for the houses but are not necessarily of the houses. And that sort of class divide actually turns out to be very, very important and part of the cause of several of the conflicts that are happening within the story. At this point, I do realize that I am sort of yammering on and that I'm getting closer and closer to just spoiling the entire story for you, which I don't want to do. Again, I really think that this is a story that if you like Romantasy, but you felt a little bit cheated by some of the elements maybe not working quite as strongly as you would like, I super strongly recommend you give Swordcrossed a try. If for no other reason than that Maddie and Luca are just so deeply in love with one another and such deeply flawed people, but whose flaws don't make them any worse for one another, if that makes sense. In fact, they make them particularly well suited for each other. I just think Swordcrossed has the best hallmarks of fantasy, by which I mean a well thought out, well drafted world for everything to happen in, with sensical building and that building being tied into every character and every element of the plot seamlessly. And it has all the hallmarks of romance, which is deep, deep character work and a happily ever after at the end. Yes, things are tied up well. We don't have to deal with any bittersweet nonsense. We just have a good, wonderful, feel-good story at the end of it that will take you on an emotional roller coaster of ups and downs on the way to get there. And what more could you possibly ask for? But that is all the time that I have for now, because I would like to continue working on my own particular tribute to the goddess Huna myself. So I will leave this review here. Again, I will have links where you can purchase a copy of Swordcrossed in the description box below. It is out today, October 8th, 2024, and I hope that you will pick it up and love it as much as I did. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please leave it a thumbs up, and if you like me, maybe consider subscribing to my channel. I post videos every Thursday, more or less, and I would love to have you join my little bookish family. Comment down below and tell me your favorite Romantasy story, if you have one that is just as fantasy forward as it is romance forward, because I would love to read more like this. Or if leaving a full comment is too much for you, I totally get it. Feel free to leave me the crossed swords emoji in the comments below, because yes, swords do cross in this story, and it's such a good time. We love a little bit of spice with our sweet in this household. But that really is it for me. Thank you again so much for watching this video, and I will see you with the next one very soon. Goodbye.